before we start, Mike, is there anything you want to say to anybody?
No, I said it beforehand.
Okay.
You'll want to introduce the class and the subject matter.
Okay. Here we go. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law.
Love is law, love and will.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you all for coming by. This is part 1 of a class that I give called Introduction to Qabala. And it is being sponsored by N.O.X. Oasis of Ordo Templi Orientis. We are the Ogden, Utah body of that organization. Not all of you know me that well. Some of us have just met. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about me.
Thank you.
My name is Karen, and I have been practicing magic from different traditions, mostly Wicca and ceremonialism. Practicing magic for about 30 years now. Someday I hope to get it right. Presently, I am active in N.O.X. Oasis, as I said, the Ogden body of O.T.O, and I am an ordained priestess in the EGC, Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, that's the Gnostic Catholic Church. And I love cats and Asian food and men who aren't afraid to cry. Okay. Well, for much of my history practicing magic, I was involved with a spiritual fellowship known as Temple of the Eternal Light, which was located in Brooklyn, New York, many miles from here. My interest in magic, and especially in Qabala and ceremonial magic, is what led me to this temple and to its founder, a man named Jerome Birnbaum. He became my teacher, and somehow, inexplicably, I ended up marrying him. Go figure. And together we ran Temple of the Eternal Light from 1987 to 2002. In that year, Jerome retired from his job teaching high school in New York, and he and I left New York City, and as we'd long planned to do, we traveled across the country in a motorhome that kept breaking down. That's a story in itself. Finally, to make a long story short, we settled here in Utah. Although the Brooklyn Temple had been closed by us, we continued Temple of the Eternal Light for a couple of years as an online information site. Now, in November of 2005, after Jerome and I had lived here about a year, Jerome met his greater feast. That's a Thelemic way of saying he died. Yeah. And after that, I chose to dissolve Temple of the Eternal Light completely, in keeping with his often stated wish that it not live on after him. He had said on more than one occasion that he saw what had happened to a lot of spiritual groups after their leader, their founder, had passed on, that they tend to start drifting away from the founder's original teachings, and he did not want that to happen here. So, for that reason, I just closed the temple. Even so, I considered his teachings much too valuable to let them die with me, and I resolved to preserve his work and to keep it active. And that's part of the reason I'm here today, talking to you all. So, what is Qabala? Well, the short answer is it's a system of mysticism with its roots in Judaic tradition. The word, which is spelled in Hebrew like this, Kof, Beth, Lamed, comes from a verb meaning to receive. And at length, there are as many definitions of Kabbalah as there are people who write about it, really. W.G. Gray, in a book called Ladder of Lights, calls it symbolic representation of the relationship believed to exist between the most abstract divinity and the most concrete humanity, unquote. Israel Regardie, a very famous magician who has had links to our Thelemic tradition, he writes in his book, A Garden of Pomegranates, "The Kabbalah is a trustworthy guide leading to a comprehension both of the universe and one's own self." And Ellen Cannon Reed, who wrote a book called The Witch's Kabbalah, which I highly recommend, especially if you come from a pagan background of some kind, she calls the Kabbalah a file cabinet to contain the universe. I happen to like this particular definition, if only for its sheer audacity. And I would add the reminder that while, yes, the universe is everything out there, it also exists within each and every one of us. We are the universe in microcosm, sorry. Yes, we are in microcosm. Each of us is a microcosm of the universe. Now, if you have ever practiced what is commonly called low magic, I don't like the term myself, but it's spell work to create something on the mundane level. If you've ever worked with that kind of magic, you may have worked with Kabbalistic principles without being aware of it. For example, let's say you are performing a love spell. The instructions say, burn a green candle to represent Venus. Or maybe another spell is going to tell you, burn cedar to attract money. Cedar being the incense of this particular sphere, the sphere of Jupiter. Instructions like these harken back to associations found in Kabbalistic magic. Now, as for where and how Kabbalah originated, again, there are a number of theories. I won't go into them all. Look them up if you're interested. But this is what my teacher, Jerome Birnbaum, also known as Tau Ursa, has written. And you will find it, by the way, in this book, 13 Tools Toward Enlightenment. And here's this one little passage. He writes, "The rabbis in an area of Palestine, then known as Safed, known today as Safat in Israel, desired to simplify and clarify the vast knowledge of universal philosophy and reveal the mysteries of life in an easy-to-understand form. They took information from the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, that is Zoroastrian, Egyptian, and Phoenician cultures, reduced the essence of the mythos, forming a symbol, or glyph, which they called the Tree of Life, or in Hebrew, the Otz Chaim. It represents man/woman, or every aspect of a human being. By studying the tree, one will become aware of the true nature of our creation and being, and the reason, should there be one, for purpose in living." And I'll go into the Tree of Life in a moment. Now, it's important to keep in mind that while the Kabbalah originated within Judaism, it is not a religion in and of itself. However, like religion and philosophy, it does provide a method for explaining what is ultimately inexplicable. And as with any such method, somewhere down the line, it will inevitably fail. Personally, I've found the Kabbalah takes longer to fail than some other systems, and that's why I keep working with it. So, this symbol, the tree of life, is a kind of roadmap of human consciousness. It also symbolizes different aspects of divine force and how they operate in the universe. As I've been saying for years, religions are a lot like cars. Basically you turn them upside down and they're all the same. And if you looked underneath any religion, this is what you might find.
Did you know that the geometry of the Qabala can be found within the geometry of the flower of life?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yep.
I like the word abracadabra because that comes from Hebrew as well for I create what I speak.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
Just
Well, to build our tree, we start with 3 parallel columns called pillars, and you can follow along in your little diagram there. The right-hand pillar is called mercy. This is the source of our raw energy, our creative inspiration, and our emotions. In fact, it actually corresponds to the right hemisphere of a human brain. The left-hand pillar is called severity. From here come our intellect and the shaping forces, as I call them, that give form and substance to the raw energies from the pillar of mercy. The left pillar corresponds to the left hemisphere of a brain. And then we have the middle pillar, which is called traditionally mildness. A more accurate name would be equilibrium. The forces here are going to balance and coordinate the energies from the 2 side pillars. And it corresponds to our spinal column and also to the corpus callosum up here. That is the nerve net that joins the 2 halves of the brain. Now, along these 3 pillars are placed 10 spheres. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're called sephiras, which in Hebrew just means spheres. Each sphere symbolizes a different aspect of human or divine consciousness. And to help us understand them and to invoke their energies when we need to, each sephira is assigned a divine name in Hebrew, an archangel, a choir of angels, and finally a planet or some other body within our earthly perception of the heavens. But before I go into detail about the spheres, first we need to look at what came first. Now, it's not on this chart, but it is on your handouts. If you look above the top pillar, the top sephira of the tree, you're going to see these 3 arcs. And these represent 3 aspects of what is traditionally called non-existence. However, I prefer to call it pre-existence. So it's that which preceded existence as we know it. I mean, after all, how can we be sure our universe is the only one? We really don't know anymore. Okay, so the first aspect of pre-existence is called, in Hebrew, the Ein. And the word Ein simply translates as no, or not, or nothing. So this is the nothing. However, it's not nothing in the sense of just, nothing. As we will see, there is something going on. It's a force that's like totally beyond our frame of reference. I suppose negative force might be a good way to describe it. Now, over the last 100 years or so, scientists who've been studying our universe have theorized the existence of something that might help us understand the Ein a little better. I guess by now we've all heard about black holes, yeah? Black holes and how they work. A black hole is a region of space-time exhibiting such strong gravitational effects that nothing, not even particles and electromagnetic radiation such as light, can escape from inside it. Thank you, Wikipedia. And there are supposedly quite a few of these. In fact, every galaxy in the universe is said to have a black hole in its center. That's a whole shitload of black holes out there.
We're all gonna die.
Okay. Now, please note, I'm not saying that a black hole and the Ein are one and the same, any more than, let's say, our sun is Tifereth or the moon is Yazad. It's not quite like that. I'm suggesting that you use the idea of a black hole as like a metaphor for what Ein represents. Now, the next aspect of pre-existence is called Ein Sof, which means no limit. So it's the limitless. Again, it's, within our own frame of reference, thinking about infinitely empty space will help you better understand the concept. So, yeah, just think of it as space itself. But remember, the true Ein Sof is totally beyond our common perception of three-dimensional space. It's much bigger than that. Now, the Kabbalistic account of creation starts with a union of Ein and Ein Sof. That is some kind of dark, pre-existing force penetrating empty space. However, this is more than a simple joining of opposites. Now, ask yourself, this is getting really abstract. I apologize. Ask yourself, could the Ein function without Ein Sof to surround it? And could we perceive of the Ein Sof without the Ein as a reference point? Yeah, it would be infinite space, sure, but in relation to what? This force.
Could there be a yin without the yang?
Yeah, it's like that. You're going to see this crop up again and again when you study this stuff. So, these two entities actually complement or even define one another. Just say day and night exists, but you wouldn't have one without the other. You'd have nothing to relate it to. Yeah, keep in mind that idea of complementary forces. And it comes up again and again and again the more you study these things.
So would that be like the yin and the yang of the tree of life in your retrospect of understanding the tree of life?
It's the similar idea, just on a much bigger scale. So, the product of this union is the third aspect of pre-existence. Ein Sof. Our. Or light without limit. And within the Ein Sof hour is the matrix for all existence. Now, if this is starting to sound familiar, it should. According to the most commonly accepted scientific theory, all matter in the universe was at first compacted into this infinitesimally small particle. And then suddenly, billions of years ago, this little tiny thing exploded in what we now call the Big Bang, scattering all its matter hither and yon all over the place. Yes, I relate the Ein Sof hour to the Big Bang itself. In fact, you can find some account of this whole process right in Judeo-Christian scripture. Now, I grant you, the King James Bible is a messed up translation of a messed up revision of what was originally written. Nonetheless, it does provide an insight now and again. So, turning to Genesis chapter 1, the very beginning says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was without form and void." So it's like this just big, empty, shapeless nothing. "And darkness," Ein, "was upon the face of the deep," depth, space, Ein Sof. Goes on, "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." Now, I think this sentence is reiterating just what the previous one said, only now we're told that this dark force, whatever it is, has some kind of intelligence behind it. Now, in recent years, some scientists have advanced a theory. I don't claim to understand all the details, so don't quiz me. But it does fascinate me because it ties in so well with what we're talking about. This theory that what we call the Big Bang is actually what happened at the very, very end of a black hole from another universe. Now imagine that, if you can, this dark gravitational force penetrating space and time on multiple levels, just sucking up everything in its path, getting smaller and smaller and more concentrated and everything, and going and going and going. And then when it reaches that one tiny point where it can't contract anymore, boom! Yes. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was. So there's the Ein Sof hour, or the Big Bang. Okay, so now that we have gotten into, we now have kind of an existing universe as represented on the Tree of Life, we can start talking about that. Excuse me. And the 10 spheres are arranged as follows. The first sephira is called Kether, which in Hebrew means the crown. This is the one. This is God as pure being. Aleister Crowley calls it the primum mobile, or the first mover, the first existence. Or it's what Richard Bach in his book Illusions calls the is. And in fact, the divine name for Kether is Ehia, which in Hebrew simply means I am. It's what that burning bush said to Moses when he asked, who shall I say sent me? Just say Ehia. I am that I am. Now, an astral attribution to Kether, it's not that easy. I like to refer back to the Big Bang creation theory and suggest these humongous gas clouds that were first created after the Big Bang, when things began to cool off over billions and billions of years. So these gas clouds, which Carl Sagan called the star stuff, of which we're all created, these big gas clouds were the first things to emerge from that explosion that first created the universe. In other words, they were the first things to be. Now, along with other attributions I mentioned earlier, and there are a whole lot more, which you will find, by the way, in this handy-dandy book, 777, written by Aleister Crowley. Basically, it's a book of lists, and he lists all the correspondences to the different spheres on the Tree of Life, and a few other notes.
Which is a giant black hole in itself.
Yeah, book of tables, really. So you'll find that each Sephira has particular deities associated with it as well. Now, Kether would be the realm of the first creator or creatrix gods. Brahma is one example, the Egyptian Ta or Gaia, or the Yoruban Olodumare, I think would also fit on this sphere.
Put this underneath it right there.
So,
Would Kronos fit on it as being the Titan god?
actually Kronos would be more like Binah.
Would it be Binah?
Yeah, Kronos is the Greek Saturn.
No, the big one. The Titan Kronos.
That's what I'm calling. See,
Okay.
the Titans were the first children of heaven and earth.
Right.
So
And he was their father.
yeah, he was the father of the next generation, the Olympians. He was the Titans. Yeah, the Titans came first, and then the Olympian gods that we all know about. So yeah, the Titans were the first children of Earth and heaven. So Gaia and Uranus they would be here.
And Gaia created Uranus from herself to create the rest of the cosmos,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I wish I were more up on my Greek mythology, but that sounds right. Okay, where am I?
Sphere of the planet.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Kether. Now, the next sphere down, we're going this way, the second Sephira is called Chokmah, which translates as wisdom. Chokmah is the supernal father energy, the primary transmitting force. And Chokmah is pure force as opposed to pure being. The way I describe it is to say that if Kether is the I am, then Chokmah is the I do. Okay? Again, I know we're on a very abstract level way up here. So, traditional texts name our zodiac, the belt of fixed stars, as the astral image for Chokmah. I would like to simplify it even further and suggest that the whole galaxy of stars created by the spinning of nebular matter could be associated to Chokmah. So first you had the nebulas, then you had Kether in action, which is Chokmah. So the first stars. Now, Chokmah is the sphere of the priapic or father-generating gods, Geb, Karnena, Pan. And when I say Pan, I don't really mean like the little guy with the horns and the hoofs and the flute. I'm talking about something much, much more expansive. What else? Like what's invoked by the priest in the Gnostic Mass. The Hebrew unpronounceable name Yud-He Vov-He which is referred to by the word Adonai, which means Lord. The Germanic Frey, which also means Lord, or the Celtic Bel, which translates also as Lord. So, yeah, in fact, whenever you hear a god referred to simply as the Lord, it probably refers back to Chokmah. Now, that was at the top of the pillar of mercy. The next sphere we're going to cross over onto the left-hand pillar of severity, to the third sephira, Binah, which it translates as understanding. This is the supernal mother, complementing the supernal father. Now, as Chokmah is the primary transmitter, Binah is the primary receiver. So Binah is taking in that initial inseminating energy from Chokmah, growing it and shaping it into a complete entity. So, if Kether is the I am, and Chokmah is the I do, Binah is the I am done. Now, a seed planted in the earth, or a sperm cell entering the ovum, these are only two mundane images of this pairing at work. Traditional Kabbalists say that each sphere of the tree overflows into the next one down, Kether to Chokmah, Chokmah to Binah, etc. Now, I'm sure there are pagans out there who might have trouble with the idea of goddess emanating from God. Sounds a little patriarchal, I know, but I'm sure, I prefer to think of Binah and Chokmah both existing in Kether simultaneously. So when Kether sees its own potential energy manifested in Chokmah, it responds by becoming receptive to that energy.
Would
Thereby-
that be the chemical wedding as well? Would that be the Nefesh and the Ruach?
That sounds right. Yeah. So, thereby creating Binah. I think maybe that's a little easier for pagans to swallow, in my opinion. And remember too, the supernal father and mother exist in each of us, regardless of what our outward gender might be. Here's an example that Jerome often used. I am speaking to you right now. I am expressing my male or Chokmah side because I am transmitting information. But as long as I'm speaking, I am not able to receive anything. You, on the other hand, by being quiet and listening, presumably, to what I have to say, you are expressing your female or Binah side, receptive to what I'm sending out. And of course, this could switch around at any moment, you would start talking and I would shut up. And herein lies a lesson to be learned. When everybody is talking at once, nothing is truly heard. Just keep that in mind. But I'm having no trouble with that today. Great. Now, it is important not to confuse receptivity with passivity. It's not the same thing. In fact, my favorite image of the relationship between the supernal father and mother comes from Dion Fortune in a book she wrote called The Mystical Qabala. In the chapter on Binah, she compares Binah to the engine of a car and Chokmah to the gasoline in the engine, okay? Now, let's say you have a gallon of gas and you pour it all over the ground and you set a match to it. Okay, you're gonna see energy released, but it's not doing anything constructive, is it? No. However, if we restrict that energy to the confines of a car's engine and ignite it, the car starts up. Something constructive is happening. Personally, I don't see anything passive about that. Now, the Planetary Association of Binah, we can get into actual planets now, is the planet Saturn, which astrologers refer to as the restrictor. And as I've been saying, restriction is an essential part of the creative process. Mythologically, all of the divine mother goddesses would be here. Isis, Demeter, Frigga, Parvati, and so on. But at the same time, this is where things get a little complicated. This sphere is also connected with death and with those gods who rule the underworld. Because on this high level on the tree, beyond our normal human comprehension, birth and death are ultimately the same process. See, like when a seed is planted in the earth, it undergoes a kind of death for the sake of creating something other than itself. Once that seed germinates, it no longer has any identity as a seed. Instead, it joins with the earth to create a new plant. Similarly, the sperm cell, chakma, dies upon entering the ovum, binah, and the sperm's cellular matter is absorbed and broken down by the ovum, so that all that remains from the original is its own share of DNA, which joins in with the DNA to create, it's called a baby, right? Yeah. I don't know any of this firsthand, sorry. Notice that the female entity in either case does not die the way the male does, although it does change. The heretofore barren earth, the earth is still there, but now we got a plant growing out of it. And we can speak of an egg as unfertilized or fertilized. It is still recognizably an egg. You can meditate on this stuff, you know, till way after the cows come home. But I need to move on. Okay, now before we talk about the next Sephira down, we need to talk for a second about this entity. If you look on your charts, it's indicated by a dotted circle right about here. This entity called Das, it's part of the Otz Chaim, and yet it's not. It doesn't exist in the same way these other spheres do. Commonly it's described as existing after another matter. Now, the word Das in Hebrew translates as knowledge. But I think a more accurate term for the present day would be consciousness. This sphere that is not really a sphere, it may never appear in magical workings as such, but still we need to be aware of it. I think Das functions primarily as a point of reference. What it's telling us is everything above it on the tree, meaning the first three spheres called the supernals, and whatever is above them, that's all beyond our normal consciousness. And whatever is below Das can be understood within our conscious frame of mind to a certain extent. With that said, we'll move down to the fourth Sephira, back on the Pillar of Mercy, Chesed, which translates actually as mercy, like the name of the pillar. Now, with the fourth Sephira, we are just within the realm of our normal understanding. This is where ideas become easier to grasp. In Chesed lies the highest perception of divinity that we can have within our normal human consciousness. And this is largely because of the number 4 and its relation to the three-dimensional space, which I presume is what most of us occupy. Geometrically, going back to your stuff you learned, if you still remember it in school, geometrically you need a minimum of 4 points to determine three-dimensional space. 3 nonlinear points make a plane, and 1 point outside the plane. Any God that we humans create in our own image, that God needs to occupy the same dimension as ourselves in order for us to work with it. Now, Chesed is the realm of all the paternal ruler gods, Zeus, Jupiter, Wotan, Amun, the Dagda, and so on. And in fact, the divine name for this sphere is the Hebrew word El, which translates simply as God. And speaking of Jupiter, that's also the planet associated with this sphere. That's the biggest planet in our solar system. And that suggests what kind of energy is indicated on this sphere. Expansion, building up, the ideas of growth and benevolence, they all fit in here. However, that's not all there is to the creative process. For the rest of it, we need to jump across and look at the 5th Sephira across from it, Geburah, which translates as power or severity, like this pillar itself. Now, the 5th Sephira represents the destructive or shaping side of creation. And this is not an oxymoron, okay? Consider, for example, the Grand Canyon. You may have been there, or, you know, I've been there, but you've seen pictures of it. Yeah, the Grand Canyon was created by millions of years of water eroding solid rock. It's one of the most magnificent examples of Geburah operating in nature. And Noah was not caused by Noah's flood. I just want to make that clear to everybody.
Paul Bunyan and
No.
his blue ox.
No, it took a lot longer than that. And this leads me to an important point. When you're discussing spheres on the 2 side pillars, you need to work with them in pairs. For example, if Chesed is the dry land rising up from the ocean, Geburah is the wind and the water eroding it and shaping it. If Chesed is like weaving threads into cloth, Geburah is like the scissors that cut out the right pieces. And then Chesed, the thread, and Geburah, the needle, will sew the pieces into something wearable. Chesed is in the food we eat that builds our bodies up. Geburah is motion, as in exercise, uses up the stored energy and burns off excess fat, which I wish I could do. But yeah, speaking of motion, once you have introduced the idea of motion, as you can in Geburah, you also can introduce the idea of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 time. Because it took 5 seconds for me to move my arm from here to there. Let's see. Now, how do these 2 spheres function in a human psyche? Well, Chesed is that part of us which is loving, benevolent, generous, placid, and indulgent. Geburah, on the other hand, is the source of our anger and our passion, whatever violent tendencies we might have. It's also our capacity for discipline and for taking action when action is called for, okay? I can give you an example, albeit a fictional one, of a person whose inner Martian and Jovian sides have become radically separated. I will refer you to a particular episode of the TV series Star Trek. And this is the real old Star Trek, okay? This is the one your grandparents watched. And the title of this episode is The Enemy Within. That's the one where the transporter breaks down as Captain Kirk is going through it, and he is divided into these two very different beings, all right? And that's all I'm going to say about it, except to point out that the whole point of the storyline was to show that neither of these halves was better or worse than the other. They needed to come back together to make a whole individual. And that's something to keep in mind too. As functioning humans, our objective is to keep these energies working together harmoniously. You know, each side keeps the other one in check. Trouble occurs when we lose control on either side. Then it's up to us to redress that balance. Otherwise, the universe will step in and do it for us in a way that we might not like. Now, let's see. Planetary sphere of Gebra is Mars, naturally. And as that suggests, the deities associated with that sphere are of a martial or warrior nature. The Roman Mars, the Greek Ares, Kali. Now, some Asatru people may. Okay, that established. Our next step down the tree of life will return to the middle pillar, the pillar of equilibrium. And this Sephira is called Tifereth, or in Hebrew, beauty. This is the sphere of a perfected individual. Tifereth, in some ways, I think is the most important sphere of all. And look where it's located, you know, it's right in the center of the tree of life, in the center of the middle pillar, right at the heart of everything. And the word heart fits quite well here. According to 777, this sphere is related to both the chest area or solar plexus of the body, also to the Anahata chakra or heart chakra in the Hindu system. Now, Tifereth's ruling astral body is the sun, our nearest star. Our sun, like any star in the universe, is a concentrated body of energy from the original nebula, out of which the star created itself. The sun, in turn, radiates energy out to its satellite planets, including our own lucky selves on this own number 3 rock from the sun, planet Earth just at the right distance to benefit from the energy without being burned to a crisp. How fortunate. Hence, we can see the role of Sol, or Tifereth, as the mediator between heaven, the nebula, or Kether, and Earth, the material sphere, or Malkuth. So all solar divinities are mediators of one kind or another. They're the offspring of Kether, who leads those at Malkuth, planet Earth. Also, Tifereth is the realm of what is called the Bodhisattva. This is a person who has come face to face with the One and chooses to become a reflection of that light to others on the earthly plane. Christ, Moses, Buddha, Muhammad. So these are maybe the most familiar bodhisattva entities. They would all be at this sphere. Also in the domain of the sixth sephira, the sacrifice gods of various traditions, such as the Egyptian Osiris, the Babylonian Tammuz, and the northern Germanic Balder, who met his fate at the wrong end of a mistletoe. So these myths are connected, of course, with the waxing and waning cycle of seasons over one solar year, just to be scientific about it. Again, there is a parallel with our actual sun. In order to provide the energy that sustains us here on Earth, our favorite star is perpetually fusing hydrogen atoms into helium. And in so doing, it is burning itself up. It is sacrificing itself in the process. What a guy. Remember too, no star lives forever. Eventually, the sun, like every star, is going to consume all of its combustible matter, hopefully not for a real long time yet. And then, according to scientific predictions, it will expand into what they call a red giant star, just absorbing our Earth and other inner planets. Now here's an interesting allegory. The color red, you see, is associated with Mars on the Tree of Life, as yellow is associated with the sun. Our star progressing from Tifereth to Gebara? Just some food for thought. After that, this red giant, science predicts, will collapse on itself into a white dwarf star. This is going to take billions more years to cool and finally fade out. So, as red is to Mars, white, pure white brilliance, as Crowley describes it, white is to Kether, the first Sephira. Now, moreover, in recent years, astronomers have been studying white dwarfs in the furthest reaches of space, and they found something really fascinating. That a white dwarf at its center contains a core of almost pure carbon. Anybody know what that is?
Diamond.
A diamond? Yeah, a diamond. It's a really humongous diamond. It's many, many, many times the size of Earth. But, yeah. Yeah. So this cosmic bling, they project, is what's going to be the final state of our sun as well. And by a coincidence, or maybe not, check this. Look in the column of precious stones, and you will find that the diamond is the mineral attributed to Kether. So our sun will end at the entity from which it began. Cool, huh? Now, not all stars are going to end this way. Under different conditions, some dying stars are going to go supernova and just explode into an enormous cloud of gas. That is a nebula, which I associate with Kether. So whether the star contracts into the diamond at its own heart or reverts back to the nebulous cosmic matter from whence it came, it realizes its own Ahia nature at the end. So we're talking alpha and omega here. And never forget, as the good book says, every man and every woman is
A star.
a star, of course. That's plenty to chew on. Let's see. I would like to finish this. I have a little more to go. Is everybody good? All right. Thank you. Now, well, now that we've established our idea of a perfect being within our own conscious understanding, the next few spheres down the tree are going to break that entity up into its components. We come to the seventh sephira, called Netzach, which translates as victory. In the seventh sephira, this is where we find love. Love in all of its forms, whether this is eros, erotic love, or philos, friendly love, familial love, or the higher altruistic kind of love. They're all here. Netzach is associated with the planet Venus. And so all the love-oriented entities, Venus, Aphrodite, Freya, Oshun, they're all here. Now, remember how I mentioned the correlation of the two side pillars to the two hemispheres of the brain at the beginning? Here at the bottom of these pillars, that's where it becomes most obvious. So, Netzach is the seat of our emotions, like the right brain, and of how we respond to sensual stimuli, sights, sounds, and so on. It's also the source of our inner muse, or our creative daemon, which I believe each of us has in some level. So it's our creative inspiration that can be found here. However, Netzach cannot create on its own. It needs help from its partner on the other side. We come to the eighth sephira, called Chad, which translates as splendor. This is the seat of our knowledge, our intellect, our capacity for logic and reason, like the left side of our brain. Chad provides the tools and the structure within which the creative force of Netzach can operate. For example, I'll give you an example here. This man is a musician, okay? And the Netzach in him will have an idea, like, oh, I have an idea for a song. It's like, da 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 da. Okay, that's Netzach going.
Yeah, I remember that.
And meanwhile, the Chad part of him will say, okay, this is where you put your fingers on the keyboard to make those sounds. And as a result, you've got the two sides working together, and boom, you got a piece of music or whatever. Thank you. Right. Now, Chad is ruled by the planet Mercury. So deities on this sphere include Mercury, Hermes, Tahuti, Ganesha, Agma, and these are all gods of communication and instruction. Also on this sphere is where you'll find the so-called trickster gods, like Loki, Coyote, Raven, Elegua. They're all on this sphere as well. So, we have our inspiration, and we have our form. Let's see where it all comes together. Down to the middle pillar again, the ninth sephira, Yesod, which translates as the foundation. And the ninth sephira is the world of our dreams and our images and our ideals. And if you're familiar, I think most of you are somehow familiar with the idea of creative visualization. You know, you have a picture in your head of something you want and you focus on that. Yesod is where that happens. Now, as the place where all the energies of the preceding spheres come together, Yazad is the last stop before they manifest in reality. It's also the first stop away from reality, but I will get to that at another time. So, Yazad is connected with our moon, our little satellite up in the sky. And so all lunar divinities will fit here. Artemis, Diana, Selene, the triple goddess in all her forms. They're all here. And finally, when we got our images and all that, we make one last stop, bottom of the middle pillar, to Malkuth. Malkuth translates as the kingdom. This is the 10th Sephira and represents the material world, containing the 4 magical elements, earth, air, fire, water, connected with planet Earth, the one under our feet. And so all the earth deities occupy Malkuth. Pan on the lowest level, Ceres, Karnena as the horned god, Gaia, Mother Earth, all that stuff. All that stuff is connected with Malkuth. By the way, interesting that I think is, while the word Malkuth is generally translated as kingdom, the root word in Hebrew is Malka, which actually translates as queen. Something to think about. Okay, so that's all the spheres. Additionally, there are 22 paths connecting these spheres to each other. Each of these paths has its own astral association. It could be a planet, or it could be a sign of the zodiac, or it could be one of the magical elements. And it's also connected with each of the 22 major trump cards of the tarot. And because each of the Sephiras is itself considered a path on the tree, that's why we speak of 32 paths in all. Now, this is where I am going to stop for tonight. I hope you can all make it back to my second half of my introduction to Qabala, where I'll be talking a little about these paths between the spheres. And since we have hit bottom here, I will go a little bit into how we start moving up again. So, thank you again for coming by.